I'm now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is Doug Lesmerises. Doug, did I pronounce your last name correctly? Because I've been seeing it for 9 years, and I feel like I've never actually had to come up with a pronunciation guide for it.
Yeah, no, join the club. I've heard it every way possible. The only people who ever nailed it, I used to cover Major League Baseball back when the Montreal Expos still
Oh,
existed, and so I would go up to Montreal. They'd be like, "Oh, Monsieur, good to," and then they'd try to speak French to me, and I'm like, "Listen, dude, it's just a name." So it's Les Maurice, like you have a dog named Maurice, and you tell him to lay. So now I
okay.
never forget.
Doug Lesmerises. Lesmerises.
Les
Just
Maurice,
Maurice,
yeah,
just lay down. Just chill, Maurice.
yeah,
You
yes,
got
yeah,
nowhere to be.
yeah.
Yeah.
And now when you get a dog, you're going to be tempted to name him Maurice. Just wait.
Just lay, Maurice. You'll be fine. Just chill,
Yeah.
guy. Exactly. So you are doing all things Northern football with Kings of the North, and I'll set the stage for kind of today's discussion because I have a feeling we're not going to agree a ton, but that's okay. And
It's
I'm
before the yelling starts. It's so pleasant right now.
so we interact. It wasn't as pleasant on Twitter probably when we interacted for the first time. You tweeted about how 9 of the 10 champs in the playoff era were Bama or beaten by Bama, and that SEC dominance is a myth, and that it was Saban dominance. We kind of went back and forth. So you threw out the idea, let's make this a home and home. So my turf today first. Let's start right there. Explain
Yeah.
yourself with the SEC dominance is a myth point.
Yeah. So my point is, I think Nick Saban is the greatest coach in college football history, and I think he could have done what he did at a number of blue bloods. I think if he had been the coach at Texas, I think if he had been the coach at Florida State, I think if he had been the coach at Ohio State, I think if he had been the coach at Penn State, right? I mean, it's not Notre Dame, right? It's not 50 schools, and it's not like Alabama didn't have a part in this. Alabama is obviously one of the great teams in college football, but I felt like a lot of the SEC absorbed Saban for a decade, and that it was Nick Saban's individual excellence as a coach, as a recruiter, as a culture builder, as a tactician that really is what drove the I don't want to call I hate the word narrative because it's facts are facts, right? But I feel like some chunk of what people think about the SEC, a decent sized chunk, is that Nick Saban was awesome, and then people just assume that like, well, if you're in the conference with Nick Saban, then you must be awesome too. Now, I'm not saying the SEC is not good, but my point is that the gap in a non-Saban world, I think the gap between the SEC and the Big Ten or Southern football and Northern football is not nearly as big as many people would think it is because it has been about Nick Saban in Alabama setting the standard. It was either Bama winning or you had to beat Bama on the road there. And so I think we are entering a world where we are not going to see the same kind of SEC dominance because a huge part of it all along was one guy at one program and he's gone.
I
So
think
that's
the
my point.
Yeah, and look, obviously, like it is the standard. Saban was the tide that lifted the SEC, pun very much intended. And there's a reason why this run of SEC dominance coincides with Saban arriving at Alabama. The point I would push back on, though, is that since Saban arrived in Tuscaloosa, you can just, and the point that I pushed back on Twitter was that if you just treated Alabama as an independent for these
Mm-hmm.
17 years and said they don't belong to the SEC still would have had more national titles than the rest of the conferences combined. And it still took beating Alabama, which, if there was only one team that was capable of doing that, yeah, I'd get it. I'd fully understand it. I'd say, all right, well, LSU was the only one that did it, but Georgia did it at different points. Auburn did it at different points. Florida did it during a time in which obviously Alabama was still finding its footing, and then we know what happened with Urban. But I think that's more so where I push back on and say if you took other teams is if you took other conferences' best team, like take Ohio State from the Big Ten.
Mm-hmm.
What's the Big Ten of the 21st century? Take Clemson away from the ACC. What's the ACC in the 21st century? It's a team that's got one national title. Like, what's the Pac-12 if you take away the glory years of USC? I think you can do that with every single conference, and it's still you can look at what's around it. And the SEC has done a better job than others have of showing that it is more than one team deep, despite the fact that, to your point, that one team obviously it allowed other teams in the conference to elevate.
You said like Georgia has beaten Alabama. You know how many times Georgia beat Bama in an SEC title game in its history? In an SEC title game in its history? None.
Well,
Georgia
in
has
the SEC
never
title,
beaten Alabama in an SEC title game. Never. And they beat them in the national championship game when Bama was out of receivers and Bryce Young was like in the backyard playing catch with himself. So since Bama's first title, the last 15 years, we'll start with Bama's first. Again, like I'm not trying to massage numbers. Like your numbers are right. These numbers are also right. 15 years since Bama's first title in 2009. Bama 6 titles, the rest of the SEC 4, the ACC 3, the Big Ten 2. So the SEC has more. But if you said it's like, oh man, the SEC, they're kicking butt, baby. They've got 4 and the Big Ten has 2. It's like, okay, well, I mean, I don't feel like that's the conversation most college football fans have. And like nobody got past Bama. Like the whole point is that everybody made their mark. Clemson got over the top because they beat Bama, right? They lose to them in the national title game and then they got to go beat Bama and they do it. Ohio State got over the top. I'm like, they beat Oregon in the national title game. That was fine. We always talk about up here in the North. It's like, that's like the Olympics in 1980. The U.S. hockey team beat the Russians in the semis. Yeah. They beat Finland in the finals. No offense to Oregon. Oregon's Finland. You got to beat the Russians, man. That's the game. That's the defining game in the modern post Woody Hayes era of Ohio State, beating Bama. But it's not beating the SEC. It's not. But I feel like some people think it is. Like the SEC chant, SEC is really Nick Saban. And the reason it matters, and I agree with your point, okay, we're playing the game of like take out the best team, and then now we're just going to discuss who's the best conference 2 through 16. Okay, I understand we're not doing that. But Saban left. So that's why it's relevant. Like for me to come on here and be like, well, what if you took out Nick Saban? It's like, well, you didn't. He's sitting here. I couldn't make this argument in 2020. Well, what if you didn't have Saban? It's like, well, we do have Saban. Shut your hole. Well, now you don't. So I'm trying to use the past to look forward. And my point is, I think it's going to be even going forward. I'm not trying to say the North is better, but I think going forward, it's even because Saban's gone.
The DeBoer era and all the eyeballs on that obviously going to play a huge part in whether that comes to fruition or not. I think if you want to look beyond the national title thing during the Saban era, you can find other things that point to more on the side of SEC dominance than not. In the playoff era, the SEC went 26-11 in New Year's Six bowls. Big Ten 16-13. When Big Ten and SEC teams faced off in New Year's Six bowls, you could probably think of the 2 times that an SEC team lost. Do you think of all 7 of the times that the SEC team won? Because the SEC is 7-2 in those instances against Big Ten schools in New Year's Six bowls in the playoff era. You know them. They were bookended these last 2 years. Michigan beats Bama. Ohio State beats Bama. That's it. And that, to me, speaks more so to the depth of the conference and why I'll always push back on this notion of like, yeah, it's one champ, it's everybody else. There have been years like that. 2016 is a really good example where the rest of the SEC was down. It was a Bama team that was trying to still kind of figure things out, had a really dominant defense, but was figuring things out with Jalen Hurts at quarterback. Then the rest of the conference, quite frankly, wasn't that good. You can find individual years like that. But if we're still looking at the sum of the parts throughout the playoff era, that's why I think the SEC continues to get the benefit of the doubt.
Your stats are true, right? And I do think, I mean, I used to be obsessed with Big Ten bowl performance. Oh my God. I was like, this is the deciding factor. Like, okay, and you know, we've clearly gotten away from that with opt-outs and like kind of, which is why part of the reason I'm so excited for the 12-team playoff, because I think we're going to have a much better argument about this kind of thing because we're going to have games that matter and we're going to be able to figure it out. So I can't win an argument when you have, you know, playoff bowl game stats that say the SEC has a much, much better record than the Big Ten. I do think as we look forward, like I think based on past history, which is fair, what else do we have to go on? But like right now, the team that was in the preseason poll in the SEC to finish 4th in the SEC preseason poll was Ole Miss, right? the team picked to finish fourth, and the Big Ten doesn't do an official poll because they're afraid of hurting people's feelings.
So
I
dumb.
run a poll.
I hate that.
It's so dumb. So I started a media poll in 2011 when they started doing it. I did it at my old stop, but I did another one here. We had the most voters of any poll, so I used our poll. The fourth place team was Michigan, was the defending national champs, right? So right now, if we're talking like depth at the top, like why should anyone think that there's greater depth at the top of the SEC than there is greater depth at the top in the Big Ten? And I think we can have a great conversation about where Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State are right now compared to Georgia, Texas, and Alabama. Like I think we can have a great conversation about that. My shorthand for this season is Georgia, Texas, Oregon, Ohio State. I think they're the four best teams. But I feel like a lot of teams like Ole Miss and LSU and Texas A&M for a time have sort of like absorbed SEC greatness when it's like, is it really there? Paul Finebaum went on a rant about James Franklin. You're winning 10 games. Nobody cares. Do something better than 10 games. Do you know how many teams? James Franklin's won 10 games at Penn State 5 times in 10 years. Nobody in the SEC, current SEC, other than Bama, Georgia, and Oklahoma, have won 10 games for five times in the last 10 years. Like LSU and Texas A&M and Florida and Ole Miss and a bunch of teams, Texas would kill to win 10 games a year, right? So but that's, I think when Paul Finebaum says something like that, that's this SEC absorption of like, oh, Penn State stinks or whatever. It's like, look in your own backyard. Look at that second tier in your own backyard. Why is that better than what the Big Ten does? And if the answer can't be because Nick Saban's good, because that never meant that Texas A&M and Florida and LSU were good, and B, now he's gone.
I get where you're coming from, and I understand the depth conversation. I think the depth between the Big Ten and the SEC, especially at the top, is relatively close. I could push back on your point by saying, well, are we just going to discount Ohio State and Mizzou because the team that was picked to finish 6th in the SEC beat the crap out of the team that's picked to finish to win the Big Ten? That's Ohio State. So you could find those examples, those cross examples, Penn State, Ole Miss last year, where they're like lining up. If we want to talk about opt-outs and stuff like that, I fully get it. But it's like there are different arguments to be made for the depth of the conference. And in given years, the Big Ten will have more teams than the SEC in the college football playoff. I fully agree with that. Here's what bothered me. We'll talk about Finebaum, one of his rants that he had the other day that made the rounds. I know you probably have a reaction to this. True or false? If the coach of an SEC program that's gone 7 consecutive years without making a bowl game or beating a single ranked team got up to the podium at media days and spoke about the SEC needing 4 playoff teams every year because it was the NFL of college football, the eyes in your head would have just rolled all the way back because that's what Matt Rule did. And yes, he's not responsible for all 7 of those bowlless seasons for Nebraska, but I don't really care about necessarily the what that was said. I support his point. I just would have rather heard it from James Franklin and Ryan Day. And Finebaum didn't necessarily articulate that the way that I chose to, but that's more so the issue that I have. People would have ripped an SEC coach if they had been in that spot, like what Matt Rule came out and said, talking about playoff spots when Nebraska hasn't sniffed a playoff berth or anywhere close to that during these last 7 seasons.
I don't like, so Lane Kiffin can't talk. How many SEC coaches can't talk then? Because they've never really done anything. Like, who are we allowing to talk? What has Brian Kelly done at LSU? You can't reference Notre Dame. By the way, whenever the SEC needs a good coach, they come up north to get one, right? Have we noticed that? Nick Saban's son of the North, by the way, right? Urban Meyer's son of the North. Kalen DeBoer straight from Washington, Brian Kelly straight from Notre Dame. So we know how you guys go about your business when you need somebody to really get it done. Where are we looking? Oh, we're looking up. Okay. So I just think it's that's like a hive. Like, how dare the Nebraska coach he didn't even come after the SEC, but how dare the Nebraska coach? Nebraska's won a national title more recently than
we're gonna talk about
we're gonna talk about
the mid '90s. We're gonna talk about the mid '90s and riding coattails and how that's not propping yourself up. Matt Rule doesn't get to take credit for that. No way. No. But Nebraska's '90s relevance doesn't give Nebraska the right to talk about being represented properly in the 12-team playoff era.
So who's relevant in the SEC then? Like, whose relevance matters? Whose relevance, like, how far back does it? Because if we're going to be relevant, like, Bama's been really relevant, but their guy left, right? Georgia just won. LSU's won recently, but they ended up firing the guy who won it and hiring Notre Dame's coach. Like, what? Like, who gets to be relevant? And I thought it was an odd thing for the South. Like, you really have to go out of your way, I felt like, to get mad about that. Like, why is the South offended by the Nebraska coach saying that? Like, what's so
because it's Nebraska. If it's Ohio State or if it's Penn State, nobody reacts like that. If it's Kirk Ferentz, I don't care, because Kirk Ferentz is the elder statesman of the Big Ten. That's fine. He's been on that stage. He's seen the elite competition. Matt Rhule has faced 3 SEC teams in his entire time as a head coach. He's 0-10 career against AP top 10 teams. I don't want to hear about Matt Rhule saying that, oh, well, you definitively know that this is the strength of the entire sport and that this landscape. Nebraska's been getting beat up by everybody. Okay, if you get beat up by everybody, you don't have the right to come out and say, oh, we know which elite is better than that elite. And that's more so the issue that I have. Ryan Day comes out and says it, sign off. No problem. You've been on that stage. You've faced teams from coast to coast. James Franklin, same deal. But Matt Rhule? No way.
Okay. This is part, like, I don't know why the South is on edge. I'm not like dipping down and trying to find how dare Mark Stoops say something that is not even really about the North, but is like sort of tangentially related to how dare, like, let's go get Mark Stoops and be mad. I don't know. I thought it was weird. I like that to get that mad about it, because Nebraska needs to be better. Like, Nebraska has the longest bowlless streak in college football. Nebraska definitely needs to be better. It's really going to help the Big Ten if Nebraska gets better. But, you know, he's won everywhere he's gone except the NFL, like, just like Nick Saban. So, like, I don't know. I'm glad that the Nebraska coach, like, has confidence in his conference. I'm not sure why the SEC got fired up about it. I don't know.
The Big Ten needs more chest pounding.
Feelings. Yeah, but someone pounded. So the Nebraska coach pounded, and everybody in the South went crazy.
I don't think everybody in the South went crazy. I think Paul.
You got mad, and Paul Finebaum got mad. You're both mad. I don't know anyone else in the South except you two guys. And I actually don't know Finebaum. And I've known you for 20 minutes. And you're both angry. I didn't come on here with, like, how dare Lane Kiffin? Because I don't know what he said. I don't care. Like, let's let Ole Miss be relevant on the field before I even pay attention to what Lane Kiffin says. So anyway, that's all. I don't know. Maybe Lane Kiffin's popping off about the Big Ten, but I haven't heard about it.
Get ready for Lane Kiffin to take that Ohio State job if it opens up. Just saying. That's the take that we're squatting on in the preseason. If that
you are squatting on that? Oh, no. Oh, squat away. No. If the Ohio State job comes open, it's Mike Vrabel. It is not Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin? You can't be serious about that. Lane Kiffin?
Ross Bjork is the AD now. Ross Bjork is the AD. Remember that. That changes things. That if it's Gene Smith that we're talking about making that hire, that's a different discussion. I think Ross Bjork changes the complexion of that job and the national search of what it's going to look like. I would not be surprised if Mike Vrabel got that job if that ended up happening. I think he will go far and wide.
Lane Kiffin was born in Minnesota, by the way, son of the North. So he does have roots up here when his dad was coaching with the Vikings. So son of the North. Wow. If that's how the South is thinking.
I don't represent the South.
Just because, no, you do. What's the name of your show?
I represent myself and my voice in the South. I don't represent the entire South. I can guarantee you Ole Miss fans are livid for me saying that. I guarantee you there are plenty of other SEC fans who are upset that I would say something.
If you have the name of the region in your show, you represent the entire region. I'm here on behalf of the North.
There we go.
Here's the thing. The North doesn't have to come get Southern coaches all the time when they're looking for coaches the way the South has to come get Northern coaches. So, like, I don't know. I'm not saying, somebody up here wouldn't take Kirby Smart, but we're good without Lane. I'm telling you, brother, we are good.
The last time.
No offense. I think he's a great coach. He's not getting the Ohio State job.
The last time that an SEC coach willingly left for a job outside of the conference?
I don't. I don't.
James Franklin, Vanderbilt to Penn
Oh,
State.
yeah. Yeah.
So they might
He's
get
from
him from the
Pennsylvania.
north. Exactly.
He's
They
from
might get him from the north, but they don't leave once they get here. Or if they do leave, it's because they get fired because they weren't good enough.
Well, it's
So just
because
saying.
everybody in the South fires somebody in 3 years because God forbid that someone take time to build a program the way Jim Harbaugh would have gotten fired in the South. He never would have been able to do
Yeah,
what he
I
did
agree.
at Michigan. He would have gotten fired. And somehow the South wears that as a badge of honor. The South is like, oh, we're impatient. We're impatient. Pew, we're the South.
Should Jimbo
If you
Fisher
don't
have gotten? Should he have gotten more time? Who should have gotten more time in the South that didn't get enough time?
I don't know. But it seems like when people do get fired, you get excited about it, right? You said
yes.
Jim Harbaugh would have gotten excited.
Yeah, no, that's a good
Would have
point.
gotten fired and you're excited. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
the
a
North
good point.
is a little more patient. And I think the South views that as like lower standards or not wanting to win. And I think the North is just like a little more like, okay, like we're not gonna freak out as fast as people in the South freak out.
I agree with that. Couldn't agree with that more. You know what I think sometimes the North lacks though, and you're a good person to speak on this because you're part of this conversation. You represent an entire region now.
I do.
The North lacks year-round discourse. The South has that in spades. And some might look at that as obsession, but I always bring up the example during those lean Arkansas years in which Chad Morris couldn't beat an SEC team. You know what they wanted to talk about every single Monday throughout the entire season, not just in the college football season, the rest of the SEC. You know what you don't do in the Big Ten is go in early March and hop on a show in Piscataway to talk about whether or not Iowa's offense is going to be better. Nobody does that. And there is a big, big difference. Whereas like in the South, those discussions are facilitated. And everybody kind of makes a mockery of SEC Media Days because there's 1,200 media members that are credentialed there who are doing radio shows on Radio Row, talking about the conference from far and wide. And it's not just getting there on your day. It's, hey, we're going to have these conference discussions. We take pride in that. Why isn't that there, in your estimation, in the same way in the northern part of the country?
So one, I think, is there's more to do. And so like good or bad, but that's not an excuse. I think people should be passionate about college football. I love college football passion. That's why we started this show. I would like the North to have more of a cultural identity, to be more bonded in their commonality, and to have their like the discourse around like, you know, everybody hates their rival, right? But I would like the North to save some of their hate for the South. That it's like we understand like you know, Oregon hates Washington and Ohio State hates Michigan and Michigan and Michigan State hate each other and Iowa and Nebraska and Minnesota and Wisconsin, all that. But also let's find commonality in the North and then let's root for each other when someone in the North is taking on the South. Because if somebody in the North wins, that helps us. It makes us look better. Hey, we lost to those guys, but then they went out and looked really good. So I don't think there's an excuse. I think you're exactly right. I don't know why the North does it. And I even at Big Ten Media Days wanted the Big Ten to pound its chest a little bit more. The Big Ten loves to talk about libraries. Yeah. I want Tony Petiti to get up there and say, hey, did anyone watch the national championship game last year? Who was in it? Who was in it? 2 teams currently in the Big Ten. Take that. And they don't. So that's why we started a show to do it. There is lots of this discourse in the South. There should be more of it in the North. I want there to be more of it because I want Northern college football fans to have pride in what the North does, to understand the differences between the North and the South. It doesn't make excuses, but let's celebrate what the North does well. And let's say like we like the way we do it. There's a lot of similarities between Northern football and Southern football. There's also some things that aren't so similar. So let's have pride in what the North does, and let's have a 365 discourse. Good. Call us out. You're right. Rutgers fans, how come on a Monday in February we can't talk about Iowa's defense? By the way, Rutgers is basically the Iowa of the East Coast. Like they should be talking about Iowa all the time. You're exactly right. I would love that. But we have to find commonality. There is commonality in the South. When you say Southern football, do you have a picture of it immediately? When you say Southern or SEC football, do you know what that means?
I think of a chilly fall day, people, probably way too many sundresses. I basically just picture the Grove,
Okay.
more or less, when I think of the image of Southern college football. Yeah, you could probably come up with something like
Yeah.
that just covers the entire South as a region.
Why doesn't the North? Do you think the North has it in the same way? I don't think they do. My daughter is in college. She took a history of college sports class, and like she was something to the professor, and like, oh, my dad's in this, and she said my dad started a show about Northern college football, and he said, "What's Northern college football?" And I was like, exactly.
Yep.
Because if it was a show like I had doing a show about Southern college football, I don't think anybody would say, "What's Southern college football?" So why the North is falling short, has fallen short. People should love this sport year round. Do you agree it's the second most popular sport in America? College football.
Has to be.
Has to be.
NFL's
So
king, college football.
The NFL's a monster. It's a monster. It's a monster. But this is better than the NBA. It's better than Major League Baseball. It's better than golf. It's better than tennis. It's better than racing. It's better than anything else. And it's only going to get better because the 12-team playoff is going to be redonk. So let's go, North. You guys have set the standard. Southern fans have set the standard for passion. So just the way that I think the North is going to raise its level of football to compete with the South in the next decade, let's raise the level of passion in the North to have the same pride in our teams and our sport year round the way that fans in the South do. You guys are the example for us.
I think Greg Sankey does a good job of embracing that.
Great job.
As great as Jim Delaney was, arguably one of the most influential people, not just in college sports, but in all of sports in the 21st century during his run as Big Ten commissioner. I remember going from SEC Media Days directly to Big Ten Media Days in 2018. And he gets up at the podium, and all of a sudden he's talking about crap like libraries and stuff like that. And I'm like, you just watched your Big Ten champ, your conference champ, get left out of the college football playoff for the third consecutive year. You should be pounding the table like you're Gorbachev. And instead, you're up there just telling about, oh, yeah, we really feel. And then the SEC is getting jabs from like James Franklin about the number of conference games that they play. And I'm thinking to myself, well, hey, the SEC has figured out the best way to be able to do this. And instead of taking these passive aggressive Midwest shots at the SEC and talking about how you were robbed a spot in the college football playoff, you didn't get what you wanted. What a joke. The system needs to be tweaked. You're up there giving these weird pats on the back that I'm just like, this doesn't grow your brand in the way that you think it does. And until that changes, people aren't going to think differently of you.
You're 100% right. Be aggressive. I can't believe the Big Ten didn't go for 20 minutes about Michigan, Washington.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing. We like books. You a big books guy? Like,
I got a couple. These are just for show.
Yeah.
Really. Yeah.
Learning is good. But we didn't realign. We didn't tear apart the fabric of college football because of learning. We didn't. We did it because of TV ratings driven by football. So why are we pretending? When it's football media days, let's talk about football. We get it. The libraries are beautiful. I want the Big Ten to step into the modern world in that way. And I do think with NIL, with the portal, I think there are some northern teams and maybe more urban areas that are like positioned maybe to take advantage of NIL compared to some of the southern schools that might just be in less populous. I think there is a potential changing of the guard. And it's not that the North is going to dominate, it's that it's going to be even. But like, why don't they say that? Like, why? Like, why does the North hide from it? I feel like sometimes the North is almost like embarrassed to be good at football because it's like, it shouldn't be the most important thing. It should be about university hospitals and life. Of course. But guess what, brother? We're here. I don't know what to tell you. So football matters. You changed your whole world. The Big Ten stretches from ocean to ocean, not because of libraries. So let's go. I think the football in the North can compete. I think the chestiness needs to come along a great deal.
Everybody needs a Finebaum. Everybody needs one. You're pointing directly at yourself. There you go.
Someone's got to be it. That's what that's our shorthand. Finebaum of the North. We want to be that. We want to be that because I like a home for the discourse. A home for the discourse. And it doesn't mean that you kiss everybody's butt in the North. You hold them accountable. You hold everybody in the North accountable to be as good as they can be. But you also have an eye. You see college football through a Northern lens, right? And it's like, guess what? The SEC is good. It's not as good as a lot of people make it out to be. The gap isn't as wide. And somebody has to stand up for the North. And I feel like the Big Ten sometimes doesn't do it themselves, which is why they stopped their poll. They stopped their poll. We don't want to hurt Rutgers' feelings. We don't want to do a poll. So I've done the poll. So now I'll do the show. Don't be afraid, Big Ten. You have good teams. Let's talk about it.
They don't have
libraries and feelings. It's the Big Ten.
No discourse on the Big Ten Network. SEC Network has that in spades, and you can get up there and say things that they're gonna piss people off. That Finebaum Kiffin interaction that happened at media days, there is a 0.0% chance that you would ever get a reaction like that at Big Ten media days, and that's part of it too. Is that they have given their personalities the forum to have editorial control. Now, it might come off as like, hey, they just gas up others all the time and that's all they do. You actually look at what Finebaum says, not just on SEC Network airwaves, but like he'll attack Jimbo Fisher, he'll attack Lane Kiffin, his beef with Nick Saban, like where he calls out on SEC Network airwaves Nick Saban for not arresting a player or not suspending a player who was arrested. That doesn't happen in other places. Big Ten Network didn't even talk about the Jerry Sandusky scandal. Like, that room for editorial discourse is only facilitated by SEC Network right now where it stands. And even Dabo Swinney himself is frustrated that the ACC doesn't have some of that. Until that changes, though, that's going to be, I think it's going to continue to be a big separator in media. Say what you want about media and the coverage, but I just think that stuff matters, and I see it each and every day in the SEC.
I want fans to be happy. That is the number one goal for me. I want college football fans to be happy. And to be happy, I think you have to understand the goals, the limitations, the parameters around your own team. And then I think you want your team held accountable, right? So, but you also want to celebrate. You can't be mad. There are too many Ohio State fans mad with an 11-win season. A discourse that is like Penn State stinks because they're 10-2 every year. Like I want fans to understand the potential, but also the realities of Northern football, right? So I think the South, in holding their own teams accountable, I don't think they've held Kirby Smart accountable. I have not liked the discourse around the off-field issues at Georgia. And I did not like that he got 11 questions on camera at SEC Media Days, and not a single one was about that. I understand he had a session off to the side with reporters and did talk about that. But compared to what happened with Urban Meyer around the Zach Smith stuff in 2018 and the way that the North and the Big Ten and me and my colleagues held Urban Meyer accountable, I don't think the South has been doing that. We've tried to been doing it on our show, but like, we can't do it. It's your team. So I feel like I think the sport is changing so much and there's so much off-field stuff, I think we can get swamped by it. I think the two legitimately biggest stories right now in college football are that the greatest coach in college football history retired. And what does that mean for everybody? And that the presumptive heir to the throne, what has been the best team in the last 3 years, has an incredible off-field problem that is ongoing and repeated and continuing. And like we end up talking about, like, is it going to be a 22% revenue share or 21% revenue share? I get it. But like in normal times, those are two earth-shattering stories. And from up here, I don't feel like Georgia has been held accountable the same way that some other schools in the past have been held accountable. If you want to disagree with me on that, maybe you have a better handle on that. But that's the view from here. But I do think, like, on the field, you've got to hold teams accountable. I think the South can hold a coach too accountable sometimes if they want to give him 3 years and get fired because you didn't win 10 games, right? I think patience is good. Too much patience is bad. But I like the idea of talking about the sport year round and saying, like, we know who we are and this is who we want to be. And if you don't get it done, we're going to do something about it to an extent.
I will defend the coverage of the Kirby stuff, at least from what's within our control. First thing we talked about on today's show, Matt Hayes, top trending story on our website right now, is basically calling Kirby like he's Urban 2.0.
That's what I said too. Yeah, he's not Nick, he's Urban.
Which time will tell if that plays out, because I think you can find examples. If we want to go back to the 90s Nebraska examples, go look at how Tom Osborne was as a disciplinarian And look how that played out for him. Yet he's considered one of the 4 best coaches in the history of college football and walks on water in the state of Nebraska, despite the fact that he was anything but a disciplinarian during his time, and in many ways paid the price
I will
for
say
that.
you didn't let me reference the Osborne, Nebraska era for winning, but you're going to reference it for discipline. I just wanted to note that.
Won 3 titles in 4 years, one of 2 coaches in the last 70 years to be able to do that, Nick Saban being the other one. Trust me, yeah, I spent time out there and understand very well that it's God and Tom Osborne, like in probably that order. And the notion that you have to be this disciplinarian or else like you're just going to fall apart in the way that Urban did in 2010. Like, sadly, I mean, I wish I could say that were not the case, but unfortunately, there's been so much incentive to not necessarily being that person, and Kirby might be benefiting from that as we speak. And until he loses those games, that's probably going to be the thing that we move past from once the games actually start.
But all we can do is add a but to every time we
Fair.
talk about Georgia. So like we can't control whether what happens with him in his career. We don't know what's going to happen on the field with Georgia, but we can make sure the discourse around Georgia includes that, because or we just don't care about it. I was shocked, because I think it's a different thing to make someone be accountable on camera in a setting where the whole college football world is watching, and 11 questions and nobody asked. He would have gotten asked about it up here.
Fair. Definitely fair. Okay, last thing for you. Speaking of Georgia, can you look into my eyes and say with a straight face that Georgia's going 9-3 and missing the playoff?
Georgia is going 9-3 and missing the playoff. I think they're going to lose to Texas. I think they have a chance to lose to Bama. I think the Tennessee game. I'm very curious about Clemson. I think Georgia. The first title was one of the greatest defenses in college football history, right? The 21 title. That's what Georgia was. The 22 title, and again, I had an up-close view of this. I was at that game against Ohio State, is Stetson Bennett by the end of the year was a stone-cold killer. A killer. Like, that he stepped on that field and led that drive at the end is like, okay. Because that game's not in the 20s. That game's in the 40s. So, 2 titles in 2 really different ways, right? So, is this Georgia team, does it have one of the best defenses in college football history? They have a lot of good players. I don't know. That's a high standard. And are we sure Carson Beck is a stone cold killer the way Stetson Bennett was? I know some people think he's the best quarterback in college football. I think quarterback is down in the sport this year. Like, generally, I don't, there's not a Trevor Lawrence or a Bryce Young or a Caleb Williams. I think it's a little down. So I don't know about those 2 things. And then if that's the case, their schedule is ridiculously tough in a world where we felt like last year for 2 months, we didn't know about Georgia. Now they beat some top 25 teams in November. I know that. But they also got to the game they had to win and they didn't win it. So, there's a lot. Was there talk last year that it's Georgia versus the field for the national champ? I thought that was a vibe for a while. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, I think that's fair, especially when you're trying to three-peat in the previous year, losing 15 players to the NFL draft and then going 15-0 with a 65-7 national championship. Changes how we talk about you year to year with what you lose.
I thought that was the vibe. I thought that was wrong. I didn't have that vibe at all. I thought Georgia was good. I did not think that there was anything that proved they were head and shoulders above anybody. So with the schedule significantly more difficult, and this is the thing about the SEC, it's like, do you have the best program who's going to steamroll everybody, or do you have the best conference? Because if you think you have the best conference, man, I'm looking at that Georgia schedule. That is not a cakewalk. So I'm curious. And that's where I am right now. It's not because I'm a hot take artist. I am wrong all the time. I also picked Ohio State to go 9-3 in Ryan Day's first year with Justin Fields, and they went undefeated into the playoff. So I have a terrible record on these things. But I think Texas is the SEC monster this year. I think Bama will take a step back because you have to when you lose the greatest coach ever. But I think they still have the ability to bite people. And then I think there are enough other games on that Georgia schedule that are in the danger zone. So, and I really am intrigued by the 2 second-year quarterbacks in the SEC and Jackson Arnold at Oklahoma and Nico Iamaleava at Tennessee. And could one of those programs make a jump? And then if you think that could happen, if you think Texas is going to be great, if you think Bama retains some part of being Bama, if you think LSU is going to be good, like, is the SEC going to put 6 teams in? I don't know, right? They're not. So that's how I get to 9-3, Georgia not in the playoff. You are more than welcome to run this back 4,000 times on your show, if and when this is wrong. But I don't think it's Georgia and everybody else. I don't. And I am also tipping the cap to how good Georgia was those 2 years. I don't think this Georgia team is as good as the 2 national championship teams.
Can we put a wager on this? Does that facilitate discussion? Is that because you can't just take 9-3 and just be like, hey, we're not gonna discuss anything.
So what would you take? Because like for you to take Georgia makes the playoff and I take miss is like, all right, well, what are the odds on that? Like if we do the odds, make or miss, we could do that. Or if you want to stake a claim and then whose claim is closer, we could do that. And then do we want to embarrass ourselves? Do we want to, I'm just a humble podcaster. I don't have a ton of extra coin lying around. Like what are we talking about here?
No money. Okay. I'll take 11-1 or better for Georgia in the regular season. You can have 10-2 or worse. So I'm giving you, I'll compromise. I won't just say 9-3.
It's very kind. Very kind.
When that's clinched, either way, we have to start one of our shows.
Yeah.
And I will say, look, if I am right, you will have to say, I was wrong. I was wrong about Georgia. Conor O'Gara was right. And the South may know a thing or two. And if I am wrong, and if Georgia is 10-2 or worse, I will say the North might know a thing about college football. I'll say Doug Lesmerises my bad.
Yeah.
Doug Lesmerises was right, and I was wrong. Okay. And the North may know a thing or two about college football. How about that?
And I'll wear this hat when I say.
Oh, look at that! Okay. Look at that! Well, that's a nice UGA hat.
We do a dog mentality segment multiple times on Kings of the North, so I have my hat ready. So I often wear it ironically, but I will wear it. So this is me wearing it ironically. Dog mentality! But I'll wear it respectfully. Georgia's good. That's me preparing to say that. Connor's right. Georgia's good. I was wrong. That's good. Working that out ahead of time. Yeah. Yeah. But otherwise, dog mentality is what I do.
I noticed you didn't say lion mentality. Dog mentality.
Because like there was a thing. Do you know why I say dog mentality? Because there was a tweet from somebody who covered Georgia that Kirby was like at a charity bowling tournament, and they were like, Kirby Smart stepped up, bowled a strike on his first ball, and walked off the lane. # dog mentality. And I was like, okay, that's where we are. Like the guy, like we're going to talk about mundane activities as being like the guy walks on water. Bowled a strike in bowling, dog mentality. I was like, okay, we're going to seize on this.
Did he have bumpers?
I mean, it was a legitimate strike. I just don't think it makes him, the most powerful man in American sport because he bowled a strike. So anyway, dog mentality.
I've heard worse arguments. Dog mentality. Just saying.
I had like a 113 average when I was in 8th grade at bowling. So like, I know what I'm talking about here.
Yeah. 113 is pretty good. That's not terrible. You can do better than that. Yeah. Step it up. Doug, I appreciate this. Fun discussion. Looking forward to the other.
Coming on our show. You're coming on our show.
I'm going to have a long preamble, a disclaimer to share my background so that nobody accuses me of being an SEC mouth breather. We'll do that.
I love it. Okay.
Thanks, man.
I will look forward to it, and I appreciate you having me on.
Awesome. Thank you.